Yeah, it's a Saunameister, Thermovangelism, saun as a verb, S-A-U-N, as in like, are you sauning in the morning? There's a whole bunch of other ones as well.
I can't think of any more human activity than conducting science experiments.
The game I play is a very interesting one. It's imagination in a tight straitjacket.
The beauty of a living thing is not the atoms that go into it, but the way those atoms are put together.
What I always think should be the basis of education is not answers, but questions. We should teach kids how to question.
I'd like to thank you for being on the podcast and welcome you. For the folks who don't know, Jack was actually my unit coordinator and guided me through my first year of the MRes. I had a lot of fun doing it. Jack is very passionate about teaching and perhaps one of my favorite teachers so far. So, yeah, thank you and welcome to the podcast.
Hi Hamid, nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Cool. So, I think it was during first year you introduced what you're working on now. And I thought it was very interesting. You gave us cards. I think I still have my membership card somewhere here. Here you go. Aspa. Can you just tell us a little bit about what you're doing, or how did you actually get involved in sauna studies, and how did your interest develop in saunas?
So yeah, this is a big, long story. ASBA, that you've just shown up there, is the Australian Sweat Bathing Association, which is Australia's first proper national not-for-profit association designed to represent and promote and encourage the use of sauna and other kinds of thermic bathing or sweat bathing modalities. So that would include steam room, hammam, sweat lodge, things like the Russian banya as well, which is not exactly the same as a Finnish sauna. So this is what we've set up, myself and a few collaborators. Now the reasons I suppose start about 10 years ago when I first visited Finland. I had been on a long exchange to Germany for 6 months and had taken kind of 3 months either side of that to go traveling in Europe. And one of my friends in Germany was Finnish, one of the guys I studied with. I had a ticket already going through Helsinki because it was a Finnair flight. And so he said, yeah, come and hang out with me. You know, we can go up to my summer house for a few days because it was in the middle of June. So very nice weather, long days in Finland. And sure enough, we went up there and there was a sauna there. And I kind of had this conversion moment where I fell in love with sauna by the lakeside. It was a 2-step process, I think. The first was actually doing it with his dad. I don't even think Riku had a sauna with us that day. I think it was just his dad who did this. I was told pretty much every day, like at least 300 times a year, wow. His dad would sauna. And I was like, that's really, really impressive. And sitting in there, like, I was, for whatever reason, totally comfortable to go nude, even though that wasn't...
You went nude?
Yeah, well, it's just, his dad rocks up and he's nude. And I just thought, well, sure, this is obviously a non-sexual event. So I just kind of got my ducks off and went in and had a beer in there as well. He said, do you want a beer? I said, great. So it was really, really lovely. And watching him, he had this kind of mastery, I suppose, just the way he sat there and the casual but very well-trained way that he did everything. I was like, man, this guy knows his sauna. But then the real conversion moment was like maybe half an hour after we had finished, and I was sitting, I remember it quite clearly, I was sitting kind of around the table, which is looking over the lake. We were about to have like lunch or dinner or whatever it was. I had a beer in my hand. I'm soaking this up, and I just felt amazing. Like my skin was tingling, and I was like, "Oh man, I feel so good right now. This is, keep it coming. This is beautiful." And so that's what implanted in my head, like not only how good sauna feels, but but the actual extent to which you can do it, as in like his dad kind of. So my aim became to kind of, I don't know, have saunas as often as his dad.
So you felt the effects immediately that day? Like what you felt like?
Yeah. I felt kind of like you would feel endorphins after exercise, right? You know, that's something. Yeah, there are all these long-term benefits, but you actually just feel really, really good. Like once your heart has kind of cooled, slowed down a bit, and your skin has cooled a bit, and you've kind of equalized a bit, you kind of get that really nice.
Euphoric.
Yeah, I've just done a bunch of exercise feeling. My body's had a whole bunch of blood pumping around it. There is endorphin release associated with sauna. We don't really know exactly how much, but again, it is like a form of moderate exercise. We could talk about that a bit later. Yeah. You also feel really nice. Your skin feels really, really soft. Your pores have sort of been opened right up. If you've jumped in the cold as well, you've done a bit of vasodilation and vasoconstriction, the opening and closing. If you, depending how much sort of cold water or snow you have around, which isn't always the case, then you'll get an extra kind of tingling sensation on your skin as the kind of core warmth. You notice like when you get really, really cold hands or cold feet because they've been in wet shoes or something, that cold skin is kind of battling with this core warmth. So it's this sort of, harmonious, blissful kind of dance of temperatures. So I then it had been seared into my my bones at that point, basically how good this could make you feel. And it was not an instant, like I didn't go straight back to Sydney and start sauning on a weekly basis. In fact, I think it was probably like another year or two until I had my next sauna. But that was my friend. This is where it really started, because my friends and I started going on a Monday night to a swimming pool up in Willoughby in Sydney for what we'd call a triple S, which was a swim, spa, sauna. So we'd do a paltry swim. One of our friends would swim about 1K. I would always swim about half a K or less. And then we'd go and hang out in the sauna and the spa for 2 hours. And so this became a Monday night thing. A few of us lived together, but a few other friends came from other places. So we would all, be hanging out. Sometimes go and have a burger afterwards, whatever. It was a really nice Monday night ritual. And while we were kind of sitting in the sauna and sitting in the spa, we were like, God, imagine if you had one of these at home. Imagine if you could do this like every day. Because I was explicitly thinking of my friend's dad, thinking like, well, yeah, and telling my friends about it. Well, you should have seen this guy I had a sauna with in Finland. He was doing this thing every day. Like, imagine how good he must feel. And this kind of stuff. And then, sure enough, after a while of talking about it, one night we're sitting around drinking wine and we looked on eBay and thought, right, let's see if there's a sauna. And sure enough, the gods were kind to us, and there was a good finished sauna for $1,000, kind of small enough to fit at our house. And it was, the only catch is that it was pickup only, and it was 14 hours north of Sydney. But we were like, that's okay. That's yeah. We'll get it. Someone got a trailer. We can. So we basically contacted them and said, hey, we can come up this weekend, because it was Easter weekend. So this auction still had a bit to run on eBay, but they were like, we said, can we just buy it off you? We'd happily come up. And they said, yeah, sure, we'll close the auction. And they did. And then we had to hire a truck. I'd never driven a truck before. It turned out that only one of my friends could accompany me, and he didn't drive manual, so he was just doing sort of support the whole way.
Cheerleading?
No, not cheerleading. It was like in rally driving, the navigator is just as important as the driver. Right. Okay, so yeah. He played essential support role. And we had a ripping good time, kind of going up the highway and back. We stayed overnight with the people that we bought it off, which was quite funny. There were these eccentric Germans living on a 12-acre property that the guy had built himself. So I'm pretty sure he'd built the sauna as well. And yeah, we got it back to Sydney. Somehow or other, we made it back alive in this sort of 40 hours, 2,500 Ks kind of journey, and it was great. We had to. The one problem was that we thought we could plug it in. We didn't realize we'd have to wire it into the front power box because it was proper 3-phase. Right. So that took another month until we got our friend around to do that. But basically, long story short, we set up this sauna at our house, and that then became something we did almost every day. Certainly a couple of times a week, and not just that. It not just became part of our lives, but we brought it in we brought a lot of friends over, and they would kind of be aware that we had this sauna, and we'd all started talking quite fanatically about sauna. It was obviously like ridiculous as well. I mean, the whole world takes itself so seriously that coming and kind of yahooing about this sauna that you've just bought off eBay was a whole lot of fun in this otherwise serious world. Because I should say as well, I was in the middle of a PhD at this point up at Macquarie. I started that in 2009, finished it in like 2013. So we got the sauna in like the second year of my PhD. And I then started using it for many, many years on a pretty regular basis. And it really did become part of my life. I would go conferencing for PhD reasons about once a year, usually to the US or Europe. And I had this motto, another city, another sauna, which is where I would find a good bathhouse somewhere. Because I also missed it. I thought, well, like, I really like doing this on a regular basis. It makes me feel really good. It's like going for a run or a swim or something, but I chose sauna. But then also I knew that there would be good saunas in other places in the world. And sure enough, there were some fantastic ones. And it was visiting those ones, especially where those ones that had a really good social element. So I had also my first ice bath experience, where you go from really hot to really, really cold. I didn't do that in Finland the first time. The water was cool, but it wasn't freezing. And that first ice bath experience in New York at a place called the Russian Turkish Bathhouse was fantastic. And that place was also really, really social. So this gave me an idea for the kind of place that a sauna place could be. And they had steam rooms and stuff as well. And I thought, we don't have anything like this in Australia. Like, we really don't have anything like this in Australia. So I started scheming for, how you could build a big community bathhouse, and spent many years thinking and talking about this, and kind of had drawn up all the floor plans in my head and everything for if you had $50 million and could just do it. And then it wasn't until 2015 that things took another serious turn, because I went back to Finland en route. I was going to Germany for a conference. And I took 3 days in Finland. I knew that if I flew Finnair, it would go through Helsinki. So I took, a 3-day layover. And it was 3 fantastic days of kind of not just having 3 really good saunas at 3 different places, but I also found a secondhand bookstore where I bought, I'd just gotten a new job actually, and so I was for the first time in a long time I didn't have a whole lot of money, but I knew there was a guaranteed income coming in, so I just whacked my credit card with this €500 purchase of books from a secondhand bookstore, all sauna books. So I started building a sauna library as well, because I'd realized that there was very little research into sauna.
Right.
This is another point that we can kind of discuss further. Anyway, on the back of that trip, I thought, I've got to do something about this. I came home, was like, we need to do something. So I started a blog. I started a sauna blog. And then very quickly I stopped doing that blog, because I'd been contacted only about 2 weeks in by the president of the International Sauna Association, who had seen the blog and said, hello, this is what we do. We're the ISA. You should be aware of what we're doing. And I said, great, awesome to get to know you guys. How do you join? Because this wasn't entirely clear. And then he sent me the constitution, the bylaws, and it just said something like, they accept 1 member per country. Well, it's like 1 association per country. So it's like an association of national associations. It's not for individual people. Right. And when I realized that, and you have to be a legally recognized entity in your jurisdiction, and I thought, Australia has no sauna association. So we've got to start the Australian Sauna Society, because there was the Finnish Sauna Society. So we were like, let's start the Australian Sauna Society. Then realized that the acronym would be ASS, and that this was not a particularly clever acronym for for marketing purposes. Like that card you showed up before would have said ASS, and that's not the way to indicate a family friendly organization. Then the Australian Sauna Association was also a little bit bland and a little bit narrow, because I'd been, I'm attracted to those people who sort of talk more broadly in terms of sweat culture, like, the Finnish sauna, the Russian banya, the Mexican temescal, the Japanese sento and mushiburo, and those kinds of things. So we called it the Australian Sweat Bathing Association. So ASBA it's got a nicer ring to it as an acronym as well. Yeah. It's like a real name rather than the ASA. So ASBA, so that's a tiny little sort of snapshot of how we got there. What that association does, we haven't really even explained yet, but we're going to be promoting, we've got a massive constitution with 41 different goals. And we're setting it up to become like a full-scale national organization, starting with no money and without any intention to heavily monetize what we're doing. But we're going to play the long game to gain legitimacy and credibility and try and shift from a piddly little hobby association into a genuine national association.
So what are some of the goals of this association that you're trying to establish? I was listening to that interview, and I can tell you're very passionate about saunas just talking to you, but culture seems to be an important thing that is attached to saunas and sweat bathing. I remember even when you talked about how your first time with a sauna, I remember as a teenager, I was like 19 I think, and I started weightlifting, and I used to have a lot of pimples, and I went to a sauna. I'd go like 2-3 times a week, and I realized, oh man, this is the shit. Like, like this is actually quite amazing, because as you said, it opens up your pores, and I suppose clears it up. But what is it that you're trying to accomplish with this association?
So the overarching goal is to make sauna more accessible and more within Australia, both in terms of locations and cost. And also to build a culture around it. So we have this line about building a new Australian sauna culture. And what that means is a sauna culture is where a lot of people in a lot of places know how to use the facilities. Because the big problem we have in Australia is that saunas are around, but they're often not very good. They're often, like, for instance, not hot enough, or you can't put water on the rocks because the owners are risk averse for some reason, or they've bought a crappy heater because it was cheaper on eBay or something. So there's a lot of education problems, both with owners of saunas, like in pools and gyms and stuff, but also with guests who kind of don't really understand the best ways to kind of use it, like how to use it in a way that makes it feel like exercise and sort of meditation as well, like as in an escape and escape from the world and this kind of relaxing little retreat, even in the midst of a very busy life. So ASBA's aim, we have a whole bunch of sub-aims, but we basically want to promote sauna as a healthy and fun activity that's got a lot of value in the 21st century for being multicultural and intergenerational and offline. It sort of does a lot of those good things that community-based ventures should do. It brings people together over something healthy and fun. So community building, like, there's building a sauna culture on the one hand, but that is a gateway to broader community building generally, as in getting people together in all types of places, all types of demographics, and just kind of getting people to come together and connect, because it is an interesting social experience. And even if you don't know many people, if you go to a sauna, you can kind of make friends because of the way, that there's a different type of social interaction there when everyone's kind of, even if you're in your swimmers, right, you're still kind of not in your normal clothes. You're not in your normal sort of like, symbols and signs from daily life. So it's a bit harder to know where people are from, when you're sitting in a sauna with them.
So almost like a great equalizer. It puts everyone on the same level. Yeah, that's interesting.
That's the idea. I mean, the Finns talk about that very proudly, I suppose, that sauna is this egalitarian space. And that's certainly what we want to push. I think it doesn't always quite work like that. But for instance, it's apparently one of the only places, perhaps the only place, I heard this in the Swedish Navy, where officers and soldiers will sit together, is the sauna.
Oh, really?
As in, like, they're the kind of, that distinction, that hierarchy kind of breaks down. It doesn't always play out like that in practice, especially because saunas are often kind of inexpensive places that are for the wealthier amongst us. Right. That's a bit of a different issue though. But yeah, we also believe not just in the equalizing power of kind of being in a sauna, but in its power as a technology of community building and health promotion in a world where we're getting increasingly fragmented and we're not doing enough exercise. So we're increasingly socially fragmented due to the nature of modern society and technology and what kind of how we can all sustain a life now without relying on people as directly as we used to in the past, and that goes to a whole bunch of, and we can all watch TV when we're tired, and so we don't hang out as much. Right. So sauna has really good potential as a mode of bringing people together around fun and healthy kind of experiences.
How different is the sauna culture from one place to another? I mean, the Finnish, you said they're comfortable being nude, but like, what's the landscape like? How different is it?
Yeah, that's a good question, because there are a lot of differences. I would say, I think in my experience, most of the European countries, it's more of a nudie direction with regard to attire. So Germany is the same. They're very big that you must sit on a towel and you must not wear your swimmers. Both of those things are musts. They will point out that you're not supposed to wear swimmers. There's something I believe that they think that's something to do with hygiene and sanitation, which I don't fully buy yet. I think they've done some research, but it's only in German and it's buried in their archives, which is something else to discuss later. In Finland, I mean, the way that they behave, though, is very, very different in Finland and Germany. So in Finland, I would say it's much less structured, because everyone kind of knows how to use the equipment. You go into a Finnish sauna and people just, it's a pretty, there's no one running the show, and people will go and throw water on the rocks, like in a bit more of a casual way. Whereas in Germany, there's quite often, especially in the public saunas, this guy called a Saunameister, who runs, or can be a girl as well, Saunameisterin, who sort of runs this session. So, and it's a session because that's the steaming kind of session. They call it the Aufguss ceremony, where Gießen is pour and Auf is kind of on. So it's like this, sometimes translated as infusion, because they'll often also put oil, some kind of oils in the water. So for instance, like
eucalyptus oil.
Yeah, eucalyptus, or having mint is actually really nice, because then you get this kind of menthol. It's like the healthy version of a menthol cigarette. You're getting steamed, with that kind of, you get left with that minty sort of chill. You can do lavender in the evenings and things like that. So, but what they do is they put water on the rocks, and after a bit of a speech to everyone, and there might be 30, 40 people in these public saunas, sometimes more. And as they're kind of steaming it up, then they'll start whipping a towel around so that they start spreading this steam. And sometimes they'll even walk around and like blast it into your face kind of individually if you want, which I quite like. If they ever offered that, I'm like, yeah, bring it on. But yeah, so I think the Finns would just be rolling their eyes going, I want to go and put some water on the bloody rocks over there, and you've got this guy waving a towel around. So it's really quite different there. And then Russian banya they don't look exactly like saunas. There's they're often kind of a bit more concrete, and sort of, maybe wooden benches nailed into concrete rather than just straight wooden boxes. They're often sort of heated a little bit differently, really big heaters where, they kind of, there's not so much water on the rocks, but there is a way to kind of either splash water in somewhere and create humidity on the concrete walls, or, again, it's not kind of a ladle on the rocks like you often see in Finland. So there are that's just 3 different places with a prominent sauna culture. So there's quite a lot of differences. In the US, it's very much a swimwear sauna culture. Just like in Australia, we're promoting a swimwear kind of sauna culture, just like going to the beach or going to the pool, because we don't want it to be a nudie club. We want it to be like safe and accessible and comfortable and friendly and all that kind of stuff.
Not too crazy, otherwise people are going to freak out.
Yeah, otherwise it will just be like a naturists club. And as much as I think it's important for people to get over bodily hang-ups, Sauna is actually really good for that as well. Like, even if you're wearing swimmers, like I've got friends who've had body image issues who say that regularly going and being in your body in that kind of public space, but in this sort of weird way where people really aren't focusing on bodies very much. Like, the heat is so oppressive that you kind of are forced into this weird sort of liminal kind of headspace. You can still talk with friends and stuff, but everyone's getting sweaty and hot, and that's just not, it's just a different kind of space. So there's that's another thing that we want to promote with ASBA, is even just by virtue of coming out and having, public bathing events like that, it's really good for people to see real bodies, because we don't see enough real bodies, but young people especially don't see enough real bodies, and they peg how they're supposed to look to these images that are designed by people who make money out of those images. So there's all those kind of edges to it as well.
Nice. Okay, let's talk about some of the research and some of the benefits of actually doing sauna. Because I don't know. I guess for me, I always found it useful, but people may not be aware of its utility. And I think there's some value in just like pointing out what people would gain, besides obviously the social interactions that you get. And you've mentioned some health benefits, but if we could explore that, that'd be really good.
Yeah. So, I mean, the main qualification is A, that I'm not a medical doctor, and B, that we don't really have sufficient research in terms of good, hard scientific evidence, which is really surprising given how prevalent sauna is and how old it is and how much strong anecdotal evidence there is. But to give you an idea, there is no international community of inquiry that deals with sauna at all. There is, even with things like hot springs and the spa industry, you have kind of global conferences and stuff like that. With sauna, there's nothing. So me and a colleague from the University of Eastern Finland are actually starting something called the International Journal of Sauna Studies. Mm-hmm. But I can come to that, I suppose, after. I just say that as preface to the point that we have a number of preliminary indications of improved health outcomes with repeated sauna use, but they're not yet substantial enough in terms of size, replication, parallel studies. We don't have enough randomized controlled trials, all that kind of stuff. What it would seem, and actually there's a systematic review that's about to come out, and that found in total 40 papers where the criteria were that it had to be multi-session use, so 3 or more saunas, and so you have only 40 papers that these guys could find in the entire world, which is sort of nothing, especially because they weren't really interconnected papers. Some of them cite each other, but what it would seem is that on a variety of health sort of indices, sauna is doing similar things for us that exercise does. So like the cardiovascular workout is quite pronounced. You actually really notice that. You'll notice that you sweat, of course, but you also notice that your heart rate really increases. So that's your body's response to heat shock and to heat stress, is to increase the circulation and sort of open the blood vessels a bit. So just like exercise is associated with longevity, sauna is kind of doing something similar to your body at a physiological level. It releases heat shock proteins, and again, I don't sort of have a full scientific understanding of how these work, but my limited understanding is that heat shock proteins are important for sort of regulating the folding of other proteins, and so if you're keeping your system well flushed with such proteins, you're less likely to develop protein plaques, and misfolding and all the consequences that come from there. So the most exciting studies that we have are all from a large Finnish study. They've published about 4 or 5 papers now. They might even be coming up with their 6th shortly from the same data set, but they've done a whole bunch of analysis on it. The data set was 2,100 men, something like that were...
Coming? Oh, Alex, please. Sorry, I forgot to mention Alex was coming.
That's all right. We'll just start from the data set so you can cut that in.
Alex.
How's it going?
Good.
Sorry, I should have mentioned that.
Yeah, no worries. You already started?
We're like...
Am I interrupting a nice anecdote or something?
Yeah, that's okay. We're halfway through talking about some of the research.
Yeah. So the data set?
Yeah, so the data set was something like, it was over 2,000 men, and they were measured, or they took a baseline in the 1980s, somewhere from like 83 to 89, something like that, and they've followed them up basically in terms of how health outcomes correlated with frequency of sauna use, as well as things like temperature and duration. So not just did you go to the sauna, but how long did you stay and what was the temperature. Controlled for factors like weight and smoking and exercise and other things. I don't know how successful you can actually control for that, but they've done their best. And what they found is that there is a noticeable... So they've published papers on cardiovascular illness and all-cause mortality, where there was a decreased risk the more frequently you sauna, something like 40%. And this is of the people who do it 4 to 7 times a week versus 1 to 2 times a week. So it's not just like once a month versus once a week. We're talking people who are doing this almost every day, as if, you know, they were giving their body like a big hit of exercise every day. Another really important one is dementia. This came out. There was a decreased association with, or an association with decreased incidence of dementia in people who were sauning more frequently. Again, I understand that's been well established for exercise, that the more of an active lifestyle you lead, the more the brain has a chance to stay fit and healthy. Right.
And that's actually really interesting, because going back to the heat shock proteins, so heat shock proteins actually stabilize the folding of proteins that are created by this other protein that's called a ribosome, and as they come out, they usually fall naturally into the most stable position. But when there's stress in your body, so there may be oxidative stress, so what happens is that your body starts making these heat shock proteins which stabilize that folding of those proteins, and as well as this other benefits that deal with oxidative stress as well. It would make total sense with dementia, because you have proteins like beta amyloid which become plaque, and essentially that's what causes the issues like Alzheimer's, a bunch of other neurodegenerative disorders. So I'm not actually shocked that you have this correlation between dementia and sauna use.
I mean, and the potential there is huge. That if you think as a, you know, in terms of a large scale public health planning perspective, you've got aging population, you've got dementia and inactivity, and, you know, poor diet and a whole bunch of other things. One of the big problems is it's hard to get people to do exercise. People would all admit that themselves. Sauna is so luxurious and it doesn't feel like exercise, that if you made this available, if you said, hey, like, just go and sit in the steam room for 20 minutes, like, each night, well, you know, government subsidy to do a conversion of your shower into a steam room. Just make sure you use that for 20 minutes. Feel free to use, you know, candles or oils, or play classic music or the radio, whatever the hell you want to do. But just what you need to do is get your heart pumping a bit, and that'll be as if you went out for a walk, but instead you're just sitting there like luxuriating, kind of like not quite a king perhaps, but like royalty. In that moment, I think it doesn't matter. I often think that even, you know, my sauna was so good at home, my home sauna, that Bill Gates, he might have been able to build a bigger facility, or have fancier equipment or whatever, but he couldn't buy any better heat than I was getting in that sauna. Like, he just could not. It was so sharp and rich and perfect. Like, once with the basic equipment in place, it is kind of sublime. So people need to be able to learn. You need to educate people about how sauna works in that kind of way, because it's not immediately obvious. Like, you work that out, that's how it functions if you do it a lot. But I mean, I suppose bringing it back to these studies, the other ones where you had similar sort of association of lower incidence were hypertension and respiratory illness. So these are all... I mean, hypertension kind of makes sense as well, that if you're sauna, a bit like exercise, lowers your blood pressure, it's kind of dilating your blood vessels as well, so the pressure is lowered, and if you do that consistently, apparently it's sort of, there's a small residual effect in terms of lowered blood pressure. I mean, there's been other smaller studies where a group with hypertension headaches found improvement with regular sauna use. And another thing is that there was a study quite recently, I forget which journal it was in, but it was about whole body hypothermia, that's hyperthermia, getting hot, as a way of treating major depressive disorder. So they used some weird kind of foil bed kind of thing. I can't remember exactly how they did it. It's been a while since I read the paper. But it's screaming for like a large scale study into whether regular thermic bathing, either hot springs or steam room or sauna or whatever, is going to help. And anecdotally, it's really good for mental health. I can report that. My friends can report that. A friend just told me on the weekend she's just been having some serious anxiety issues recently, going to social functions and stuff. And one day she had to go home because she was just like, I don't want to go out to that thing. It's going to be torture, and I don't want to go put myself through that. And she was just kind of feeling stressed, and she just went to the sauna instead. And she said she felt so much calmer after that. So there's loads and loads of stories out there like that I think warrant serious investigation. It's just really, really hard because there's not much in the way of research infrastructure to do these questions, which is why we're starting the International Journal of Sauna Studies, so that hopefully we can create a forum. And I'm pleased to say, actually, the chief investigator on those Finnish studies, the longitudinal ones, he's my co-editor of this journal. Nice. So, in terms of starting a research field, this is what we've been talking a bit about in the Master of Research that you guys have been involved with is like one of the key things if you're going to start a new research field, especially a new journal, is it needs to have credibility. And if you, the way to get credibility normally, if you're say Elsevier or someone else with huge amounts of money, is you basically entice leading people to publish in that journal, and then you also treat them like kings. This is what Robert Maxwell did, the guy who set up the kind of Elsevier empire, or what is now the Elsevier empire, Pergamon Books, I think it was, or Pergamon Publishing. But he would just throw huge amounts of money at these guys to make them feel like kings and get their support. You host conferences. If you can, you fly people over. At the very least, you feed them well the whole time. And then good people publish their research with you. And that's how journals like Cell and Nature and those kind of things evolve. And then once they have that credibility, that symbolic recognition, that symbolic capital, then they are sort of forces in their own right. They've achieved that sort of credibility. So the International Journal of Sauna Studies is definitely not going to be owned by Elsevier or any of those other morally corrupt academic publishing companies who publish, so we're told, with a greater profit margin than places like Apple and Google, and are very clearly in it for the money.
Really?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. There's a few articles that suggest something like 35% sort of profit margins. It's because they don't. Their product is given to them for free by the academics who sign away their copyright. They have a tiny amount of overheads in terms of processing and whatever. Right. And then they have this huge market of researchers and libraries and institutions who want to pay for the research. They have confidentiality clauses with all of them, so you never know how much anyone's paying. So you charge the absolute maximum that the market can bear. It's horrific. There was a great article in The Guardian recently on Robert Maxwell and the sort of origins of the modern scientific publishing enterprise. So knowing all of this, as I did when I was setting up ASBA, I thought the International Journal of Sauna Studies needs to be open access, and it needs to be explicitly and proudly open access in protest against all of those for-profit publishers. And, because some of the for-profit guys, if you want to make your paper open access, it will cost you $3,000 because they know that in your funding, the requirements are to make it open access. So the analogy I use is that when a mechanic knows that your car is getting covered by insurance, they will charge you more because they know that the insurance company will pay more than you are. You'll shop around for whoever will give you $200 off, like if it's your money. But so the academic publishing companies are like that. They know that the unis are, you can build $3,000 into your funding application, which is fine at one level if you're earning doing a big $1,000 grant. But when you're just like a person who's published their first article, because this happens not just in the scientific journals, this is in the history and cultural ones, like the ones I was publishing in, and you're like, $3,000? What? No, I'm not. I'm not paying that. Like, are you kidding?
It's ridiculous as well because a lot of the time
we don't need to see Alex.
Yeah, just as well, I guess. No, a lot of the time the public's paying for the research, and then the researcher's given almost, or a lot of times paid to put in a journal, who then charges the public again to look at the research that they paid for. It's a scam like 3 times over.
It is, and the problem, like the only way that would stop is if you had coalitions of like real solidarity amongst the world's researchers to say like moratorium on sending our research to any journal run by Elsevier or Taylor Francis or Springer or whatever. The problem is that, like with most ethical choices, enough people don't care that then those are the things in place with the credibility. And you are increasingly seeing more open access journals like start. The directory of open access journals, the DOAJ, they list over 10,000 journals on their database now. And to get listed on there, you need to have run, I think, at least 2 volumes. And so like there's a lot of stuff out there. I just think though that there's when we talk about this in class, there's so much emphasis in our society generally on product over process. Right, so we only look at the glitzy final product, whether that's the cheap clothing in the department store that was made by people in East Asian countries or subcontinental countries under shocking conditions for hardly any money, or whether it's food, like most of us don't endorse mindless, senseless, systematic cruelty and violence that's unnecessary, but we do that every day with the food that we eat. Petrol and those kind of things, all the conflict minerals in our phones, and like we're just not as a society conditioned to interrogate like the process, and if there's an ethical problem to stand up collectively. Like there are small pockets where that happens, or if like when it's something like Japanese whaling that everyone gets really angry about, then people get angry because they don't have to change anything about themselves. They just want those people to change. But when it's something that we have to change, people are far less angry. There might be anger, but it's something like I would call cognitive gag reflex. Is in like when you gag, your body says spit it out before you've really thought about it. Cognitive gag reflex is like when ideas come in and it's like, no, that's going to be way too hard. You're just going to have to change so many things about your life if you actually care about that principle. Like, let's just not think about it seriously. So I think that happens on a mass kind of level. And it's really disappointing though that in academia that still happens. Like the one place where you might expect a bit of resistance, no, academia is the exact same percentage of kind of heroes and villains as the rest of society, and I would say that's a pretty low percentage of heroes and a pretty high percentage of villains, especially in the Hannah Arendt sense. I don't know if you guys know Hannah Arendt, the German Jewish philosopher. She wrote a lot of stuff in the mid-20th century, kind of political theory stuff and reflections. She wrote a book called Eichmann in Jerusalem, which is about the only the only death penalty that Israel has ever formally carried out, I believe, where they captured one of the kind of Nazi agents and put him to death in, I think it was 1963 or something. Anyway, so she did a lot of analysis on the Holocaust. She had to flee Germany in 1933. She was actually the doctoral student of the guy that I did my PhD on, Karl Jaspers. But she came up with this concept, like basically the question of why society fell into such, terrible. Why the German people allowed this to happen, basically, and her answer was something about the banality of evil. So when something's banal, it's so like just boring as to be not even sort of worth mentioning or thinking about, but the banality of evil. So her point was that evil, it's that whole thing that evil flourishes when good people do nothing. That evil isn't like sinister, malevolent people running around everywhere screaming for blood. It's loads of people who in other circumstances might exercise more moral agency, but just basically fall in line. And it's the banality of like how mundane and everyday this system of domination kind of, how mundane and everyday all of the things are that make this system work. Other people have made similar observations. There's an amazing book about like who were the Nazis by a guy, I can't remember his name exactly, but the book is called Ordinary Men, as in like who did this? Ordinary men.
Yeah, because it would have taken so many people that, they're not all Adolf Hitler. These have to be ordinary people living ordinary lives that by themselves you would expect would be quite horrific.
Would have a little bit more, would disagree in many ways with what's happening and what was being done in their name. So, but bringing this back to Elsevier and those kind of and the academic publishing industry, I think that is a really major problem where we collectively, as the academic kind of world, have said, we'll sign that. if that's what we need to do, when you could have the leaders of like the major, the top 100 universities in those rankings. I hate the rankings, by the way, as well. They're a steaming pile of crap. But that's another problem. Yeah, because they don't have anything to do with quality teaching. They incentivize pumping out research and getting patents and things. But anyway, they're the ones at the big symbolic capital. If they all said, no, as of now, we are just putting an absolute moratorium because you can publish open access, or like we will accept minor fees that are like processing fees for staff to actually be there to do this stuff and for the hosting of databases and stuff. But like the astronomical fees that you guys charge, like, no, sorry, we are not any longer participating in that. Like that could happen. That's way more foreseeable than humanity kind of suddenly, stopping eating meat or stopping, using forced labor or other things like that. I think it's still totally unrealistic, but it's way more doable. So all of this is to say that the International Journal of Sauna Studies will be fully open access in perpetuity, and it is owned by ASBA. It is not owned by a university or any other institution, because that means that's the only way we can ensure that situation remains.
That's actually really cool. This brings back memories of us talking to Meow. That dude that put the open tube card in his hand?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he was talking about issues with publishing in science as well. And they were moving towards models where they actually, I think he said they would even get rid of reviewers. And instead, you just publish online.
Open science.
Open science.
Yeah.
So Meow Ludo is really all about the democratization of science, big time. And he's actually a member of the Science Party here as well. And he was really about pushing, so he's a biohacker, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with that term.
Yeah.
But these are basically like scientists, biologists mostly at the moment, that focus on giving science back to the people. So, if you're an old granddad and you want to go and do some science on orchid growing, you can go to a biohack lab and do it. Yeah, you don't need a science degree. You don't need to. You can go and do science.
Yeah, as long as you're given some guidance about how to obtain and
exactly. And so
submit
they're
your
probably
data
certified and things like that. But then in to kind of support that, they also really, really promote this idea of open science, about how it's not about holding all of your data back. It's like, hey, I did an experiment today, and you post it on the web and you get feedback from it, and everything's open.
Yeah, and other people can then run different kinds of tests on your data and that kind of stuff.
Make suggestions.
This is what we would like to move to with the International Journal of Sauna Studies. Is for now we'll say that it's double-blind peer-reviewed, because that's the established model for top quality, but I actually think it's far more defensible there's a really interesting model, sort of again in the vein of open science, whereby there is review, but the review happens of the research design, so not of the finished paper. So the idea, certainly if you're doing experimental work, this wouldn't apply if you were, doing a historical or sociological piece so much. But, where you can change the words after. The science would be done such that you basically send in your experimental design for review. That gets reviewed by expert reviewers, and then you execute that plan. And that means it doesn't matter what result you get, what kind of p-value you wind up with, how significant or otherwise the results are, because that's the way to ensure the integrity of the science, and to say like that takes the pressure off p-hacking and the mucking around with the pressure to come up with something like newsworthy. So that is a very different model. You could still do that, I suppose, blind, but then there's also an argument, I'm sort of attracted to the arguments that it shouldn't necessarily be blind, but I don't know, that stage of things needs to be confirmed by our editorial board.
That's actually an interesting point, because a lot of the experiments that we do in science don't get published because they are negative results, and so there's a lot of redundancy, people repeating things, ideas that are just wasteful, and so if they move to a model where you're looking at the experimental design and you get it published, whether you get positive or negative results, I think that has way greater utility in the long run.
And integrity.
Yeah, for sure.
So, this is where we would like to go with the International Journal of Sauna Studies. Though I should say that it's going to be a fully interdisciplinary journal. Like, this is a journal structured around a theme rather than a discipline or an approach. So we will have 3 sections. You've got health science, which is kind of the foundation of it, because that's also really what you need. Like, as I kind of said at the start, we want ASBA to go from being a piddly little hobby club, which it is now with 40 members and no money and no mobile sauna or anything, into a full-scale national association. That requires really good scientific evidence to say to government, hey, we're not this isn't anecdotal. Like we're not only though is there good evidence, we're the ones helping the evidence come into reality by through hosting this journal. So I call this whole thing steam and mirrors. Man,
this doesn't stop.
Yeah.
Thermovangelist, steaming mirrors. You said something else before.
I don't know. I can't remember what I said.
It is
it is a perpetual pun machine. But steam and mirrors in the sense that you start the organization ASBA and you need research there, but there's no research. So instead of kind of just publishing a few papers, you got to try and start the research infrastructure. You launch that as the journal, and then the journal's like, founded by the Australian Sweatbathing Association. But then the journal kind of seems independent. So then we can say, yeah, look, there's also an academic journal that's been started. We're actually hosting it, and then you build it up kind of from there. So it's, people can do that in ways that don't have substance, but this, is just trying to be strategic, I suppose, and thinking about, what's required, not only for the creation of a research field, but for us as ASBA, as this community-based not-for-profit organisation, to grow into a proper national association. And that means having at least enough money for a couple of people to have salaries, even if it's pretty modest. You need the thing to actually be run. All charities are not-for-profits that are big. You have people working for them. So that's where we want to go. And to go there, you need huge amounts of funding, really, and government grants and stuff like that. We're also going to look at health science, history and culture, and technology and design. So my background is in history and religious studies. So I'm the editor-in-chief and then the main editor for history and culture. And then Jari Laukkanen, the guy from University of Eastern Finland, the cardiologist, he's going to be the health science editor. And we'll have associate editors under them and then an editorial board, with specialists from each of these areas, because then you will have technology and design as well. So that way, the idea is that this will start a holistic community of inquiry, where you want the people who are doing the health science to read some of the history and culture and sociology stuff, and vice versa. You want the people who are interested in this space culturally to kind of be reading the science. Strong emphasis on translation as well. So there'll be a translational summary at the very least of every volume of the journal, maybe translational abstract for every paper, so that, we really want to push not just open access in terms of cost, but open access in terms of conceptual accessibility, so to speak. That it's one thing to just throw scientific papers up online, but then someone's got to go translate them, if it's going to mean something to most people. So yeah, we want to really try and, be a bit of a model for what's possible if you've got a vision and the dedication. We need very, very little money to do this. More money would help, but essentially, ASBA has a web hosting plan, so it's only an extra $10 a year or something to put a new domain on that with to make it its own kind of independent domain, saunaresearch.org, which people can already go to. There's already a landing page there. Then aside from that, Open Journal Systems is what we're going to use, the OJS software. It's kind of like WordPress for academic journals. It takes a lot of time to set up, but then any blog does, any good blog. And then, all of the other costs are labor costs, effectively. They're typesetting and doing the editing and all that, which basically I'm going to do nearly all of and get a couple of helpers in. But just as a bit of a fuck you to the academic publishing industry to say, this can be done by people who care. And you'd need, I suppose, uncommon levels of dedication and passion to the cause, but it can be done.
I feel like we can't let Jack go at all without first mentioning this interview with Julian Brugnall that we had on, who's a Western Sydney researcher. So he's studying in looking at treatments for diabetes. So he's actually a physiologist, but the treatment he's really kind of taken under his wing now is foot baths, putting feet in warm water as a treatment for, now forgive me, it's I'll put you on the spot here.
What do you call it? When people get, this is so embarrassing. It's ulcers.
So when diabetics have problems with circulation to their extremities, right? And there's lots of treatments that people try and suggest, like compression and things like that. So his team's actually looking at warm foot baths because the heat I believe, is what stimulates the blood flow to the feet, and they're getting some really good results, and they're doing clinical trials in it right now. So
Well, we should get him in the bloody sauna.
exactly. But he
Quite
might
seriously,
he
yeah.
might be very interested in your work as well.
Yeah.
Collaborating with you, actually, because he's looking at ways of mitigating or ways of actually facilitating healing of diabetic ulcers, and there's a big issue with that because a lot of people have to use drugs which have really negative side effects. But he's found some really positive results in terms of just heat treatment for people's extremities, limbs, because it helps. So what happens is that when people have diabetes, the blood vessels in the extremities actually become really rigid, and so nutrients can't cross the blood or the blood vessel barrier, which means that all this tissue doesn't get any nutrients and it dies off, and you get these disgusting ulcers, and essentially you might even
People can have limbs removed and things like that. It's quite a problem.
So definitely, I mean, I spoke to him about it a little bit, but he came up with baths, but you might just find that saunas may just solve the issue altogether. If you
I don't think there's any solving of these issues, but maybe a powerful remedy.
Yeah.
I mean, sauna's role as a complementary therapy is tremendous. It's the only thing bigger than its potential is the sort of astonishment about how little work has been done. Like, in that there is so many kinds of things. So diabetes, there is one. What about arthritis? I mean, this has long been promoted as a like going to hot springs and things like that. Even in the 19th century, was promoted as a remedy, perhaps not a cure, but a remedy for arthritis. I mean, sauna appears, like the heat appears to be, helpful in reducing that kind of inflammation. And there are some very minor studies. That's the one I'm most surprised that there's virtually no research about. Of all the things out there like that could have been studied so far, sauna and arthritis, because there's so many people with arthritis, and it appears to be quite effective. There can be, as well as a question about hot and cold combinations, like, the ice plunge after sauna and then back into sauna, that sort of can do more for your circulation, as we were sort of touching on before. But even just sauna itself, I'm not quite yet encyclopedic on what all of the studies say, and I don't have them in front of me. But there's effectively nothing that you could use as a scientific claim to say sauna has been clearly demonstrated to have a positive impact on reducing discomfort associated with arthritis, if not sort of even more extensive than that. So then you could add diabetes and similar things with where circulation is an issue. We were talking about depression before and whole body hypothermia. I've just come back from a conference, actually. I was just sort of a week ago getting off the plane. I was in Finland for a week, and then at something called the World Sauna Forum, and then in California for something called the Global Thermal Think Tank. And that one was particularly interesting because it was a few days long. It was quite a small crowd, so we got to know each other pretty well. And they were largely owners of hot springs. And so some people had a bit of a toe in the research kind of area, but they were more coming at it from an industry perspective. But one guy who had owned a hot springs in California for about 45 years or something said that he'd done like rehabilitation stuff up there, like serious kind of smack and coke kind of users. And he said they didn't have to helicopter anyone out of there. It was kind of remote. Like they'd be bathing for hours a day. And if they were really starting to sting, you just throw them back in the hottest pool. Even Scientology used to do this. This is one of those weird crossovers where you're like, oh God, am I now
starting a cult, are you?
Yeah, am I starting a cult, or what was L. Ron right all along? I don't know enough about it because again, there's nothing easily accessible published on that. I'm sure there's more stuff if we could poke around in archives and things like that. But some of the purification treatments were. I'm not sure if it was only infrared sauna. I'm pretty sure Elron was one of the big early proponents of infrared sauna. Early. It was actually invented in the 70s or 80s, I think. John Kellogg, the guy who invented the cornflakes, he's got something called the electric light bath, which is in the US Museum of Patents. And so one of my life goals is to go and use that thing. Yeah, it's like a little cap, like your head sort of sticks out of it. It's like a little wooden cubicle, I suppose. And just enough radiant heat from the lights that you sweat. So I don't know if that was far infrared or exactly how that was categorized. But And infrared sauna is a whole other category that's we can maybe touch on shortly as well. But I guess the point is that irrespective of what type of sauna you're talking about, or whether you're talking about steam room or hot bath, hot springs, these kind of things, like there's so much potential for these to be recognized as healthy activities, and therefore supported with funding of various kinds to make them more accessible. Because nearly all of these things we've mentioned are generally in luxury space. Hot springs, certainly, they're always a money kind of dependent day trip. Whether you're on holiday or whether you're just going for a day trip to Hepburn Springs or Mornington Peninsula Hot Springs or those kind of places down in Victoria. Sauna could be accessible. I suppose that's a bit more so. It's at gyms and pools and things like that where people are a lot more. Often still the sauna costs you extra, like $10 to get in or whatever. For the sauna and spa zone, you need a wristband or whatever, and that's understandable from a business perspective. But why do we not just fund that as part of the package and encourage way more people to use this stuff? Again, governments, however interested they might be, are incredibly busy, and until you whack down incontrovertible data and a great story that they can get behind, you're not going to get anywhere. So it's really good for being media friendly, the whole sauna thing. It's really good for being a bit zany, but with a lot of substance behind it. It's photogenic. As I said before, it's multicultural, it's intergenerational. So there's a heck of a lot of stuff going for it. And if you can start, I see it a bit like a small business or one of those kinds of things where you work for a couple of years and it feels like you're achieving nothing. And then after a few years, it'll all of that hard work starts to coalesce and crystallize.
Like a podcast.
just like a podcast.
It's only been a few months, Alex.
Yeah. But it's like any venture like that, you start, it's the very, very occasional person that makes it kind of happen straight away. That whole like overnight success, it's like when people talk about actors being an overnight success, except for the kind of 7 years of training and, kind of working 4 jobs a week, that they went through. So yeah, both with ASBA and the Sauna Journal, I'm thinking it'll take a while, but I'm hopeful with the journal because that has a much larger international audience. I think we've already got our papers more or less locked in for next year for the June conference, for the symposium, because we don't control all aspects of that International Sauna Congress, but we're able to bring in some people because we're working with the International Sauna Association. ASBA is the 21st member of the International Sauna Association, so we're sort of working with those guys. So I think that we should be able to come out with not only some interesting conference proceedings, but half a dozen or more proper peer-reviewed pieces. If we could start with that level of fullness, then that buys us, we've set a low bar in terms of producing 1 volume per year. And because it's online, you can publish an article as soon as it's out, so that people can have the citation there. Which is that's not quite open science, but that's the kind of model we should be moving to now. Because we're not going to do print copies, way too expensive and no environmental justification for that. So if you're all online, you can do online first and then collate it into a really nice PDF. The whole sort of journal, which is a value add thing, because you can download the articles as PDFs, but if you can then download. In what I'm talking about, value add is if you download the volume 1 of the IJSS, and it not only has 8 papers in it, but there's some translational kind of editorializing, but there's also some travel writing, and we want to get a couple of photo essays, might even do some art, poetry kind of stuff, like try and make this holistic as well, because then it's interesting for as many readers as possible. And that kind of direction is how I think you can get credibility as a serious publication that's attracting interest, attracting clicks. And again, we don't want sponsorship necessarily, maybe in tactical situations, yes, but we want credibility. And as soon as you can get that, as soon as you can get like world-leading research teams to publish in your journal, then you're away. Once you've started to make that money, as long as or that symbolic capital rather, then that's going to self-accumulate, like if you start making loads of money. Unless you make really bad decisions, but if you just keep doing what you're doing. And then every 2 years we'll have a symposium, which should be riotous fun, because there's going to need to be sauna involved.
I wish every science conference had a sauna in it. Right?
Man, if they had steam rooms, that's the thing. Like you could, if you were an entrepreneur, you could have like a conference steam pod thing where it could be set up at conferences, and people, if you make it easy for people where they can pretty much, you know, there's towels for them, there's a locker to put their stuff in, even if they didn't realize that there was a steam room in the lobby for this conference, they can go and, oh yeah, should we go and, you know, have a steam? And then you would not only be able to regenerate quite nicely mentally, but you can have a lot of really productive kind of informal business conversations. I think it'd be pretty rare to have like signed a contract in a sauna. I'm sure that's happened somewhere, but there's a lot of talk about business meetings in saunas in Finland, and it is an established part of business culture, is going to sauna with people that you're engaged in deal making with. Even the politicians do it. There's a famous speech by the Finnish Secretary of State from 2010 where he talks about the history of sauna diplomacy in Finland, and the most famous one is Urho Kekkonen, the president who was the long time, 25 years I think, president of Finland during the Cold War, had Khrushchev and some of the other Russian leaders over into his sauna in Finland, and they would like hammer out these deals, and he wouldn't let them go until they had sort of yielded. And Khrushchev would then get criticized back in Russia for capitulating in the capitalist heat. And,
That's hilarious.
So there is that side of it too. Like again, if you actually sort of identified all these different parts of Finnish sauna culture, so there's like the healthfulness, there's the socialness, there's this business kind of side of things. There's all the technology stuff and the evolution of the old smoke saunas with no chimneys through to electric saunas and wood stove, wood burning saunas through to infrared and sort of other fancy types. There's tremendous amounts of stuff that can be worked on that have not only health implications but potential commercial implications. In that there's a lot of, the more research that were out there, the more, businesses could spring up around this kind of stuff. And while I don't want it overly monetized, it's sort of surprising to me that there is so much, like I'm genuinely surprised that the big sauna companies haven't done a lot more research, because it would be a pretty good investment, I think, for them to be able to claim all of this stuff, but they don't, in terms of health effects and other types of historical and social claims about sauna. But yeah, they kind of haven't done it. So, if you want something done, do it yourself is the motto. And we're going to claim it with this open access flag that says you can't steal this. Someone will maybe try, and I look forward to, receiving a large check from Elsevier or Springer or something and, promptly wipe my ass with and say thanks for all your long-term dedication to promoting the cause of justice and dignity amongst the human population.
That's hilarious. Oh man, we've reached an hour and 10 minutes, Jack. Time flies when you're having fun.
Wow.
Yeah, I suppose we can ask them the last two questions that we typically ask of our guests.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I needed Alex's permission for that one. Thanks, Alex. He's here for moral support.
Sorry, what are they? Hit me with these questions.
Okay, the first one is, looking into the future, what are you most hopeful about? It can be in whatever context. It can be in the context of saunas, whatever.
I am, to say like something a bit concrete rather than that there is less suffering in the world. That's one of my big hopes. But with regard to sauna, I really hope that ASBA becomes a fully fledged national association that's financially sustainable and can employ a couple of people and do a whole bunch of community building around the country. And concomitantly, I hope that the international sauna research agenda can really grow, and that the International Journal of Sauna Studies will take root in the sense of producing fruit once a year and producing this kind of symposium every 2 years where we get people together. Because if we can do those things, then you can only control your little slice of the world. You can't solve all the world's problems. But I've put my hand up to try and lead this one, the promotion of sauna in Australia and sauna research globally, and I really hope those things succeed, because if they do, that's going to mean at the very least we might take things a tiny way back on that sort of suffering spectrum, where there's way too much suffering in a world full of too much plenty.
Nice. And the flip, I should have probably started with this question. Because now we're going to end the interview on a sad note.
No, that's all right. We can spin it. We can spin it.
Oh, I don't know if you can spin this, man. Okay, on the flip side, what are you most afraid of looking into the future? Try spinning that, Jack.
Oh, I mean, yeah, like I'm afraid that things will go exactly as predicted. You know, like the trajectory of humans is such that we have shown ourselves to be far more animalistic than we allow ourselves to accept. We're far more stupid and tribalistic and short-termist in our thinking and susceptible to all the idiocies of short-term thinking. It seems to me to be a remarkably constant formula, no matter what sort of changes, no matter what culture you're in. Sort of human stupidity is a bit like our DNA. You know, we think we all look different and stuff, and there are all these important differences, but ultimately we're 99% the same. We're kind of, I don't know, stupidity's a little like that. We have all of these cultural differences and stuff, but we're all, not just stupidity, I suppose, the same ratio, just like we said in academia before, the ratio of like villains and heroes is about the same as the general population. I kind of think that across cultures as well, because while the West has promoted lots of what I think are important things with regard to the cause of human freedom, it's almost the most spectacularly hypocritical kind of cultural movement that humanity's ever seen, because it places such a high bar and up for itself, and so systematically fails to meet that. So I'm afraid that we will continue to live in a world where we absolutely have the capability to feed people, and to house people and to make people not have to work terribly long hours in poor conditions, while some people in countries like Australia and America and elsewhere enjoy these kind of fairly luxurious lifestyles, even middle-class luxury, not just top-level luxury. And I'm genuinely fearful that is just the course that humanity's on, because we've had enough time to show our true nature when anything is possible. Like, we put a man on the moon. We've got smartphones. Like, we've definitively demonstrated, I think, that if we have something as a big enough priority and it's a matter of technology, we can do it. So the fact that we don't sort out power, the fact that we don't sort out clothing, the fact that we don't sort out, well, those are basic things. Then you've got to sort out things like domestic violence and other kinds of human evil. But yeah, the positive spin though is that as awful as all of that is, there is always the potential for change. There is always that kind of, which is what I'm gambling on with ASBA, that we can tap into with something with enough substance, then people will rally behind it. That's never going to solve all problems, but if that's not your aim, then you can be quite successful in trying to spread some goodness, in this case by spreading the good heat.
Thermovangelism, is that?
Yeah, thermovangelism, spread the good heat, ladies and gentlemen. So we're hoping to get that in the Oxford English Dictionary by the year 2050. That's one of our goals.
In addition to piffing.
Yeah, it's a Saunameister, thermovangelism, saun as a verb, S-A-U-N, as in like, are you sawning in the morning? There's a whole bunch of other ones as well, but yeah.
Great. Thank you for your time, Jack. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.